Chapter 1. Ship of Quiet Maps. The hangar smelled like used tools and sun-warmed metal, the kind of smell that promised repair rather than judgment. Light found its way through the corrugated panels in thin slips, catching motes that drifted like small, patient stars. A crumb of dust lay in a crease of concrete where the city's wind forgot to sweep. The place tolerated neglect and returned only what was needed: shelter, a flat floor, silence. Bob came because it offered nothing that required explanation. You walked in with a coat and a handful of questions and nobody wanted your papers. Promenade waited on the concrete like an old favor repaid, patched where it had scraped, paint kept bright by hands that remembered care. A small constellation had been stenciled near the hatch, modest and stubborn. Its cockpit glass greeted him with an unvarnished reflection. The soft lines at his eyes, the slope of his shoulders, the familiar tiredness. When his palm found the hull, it received his heat and seemed to keep it. The contact steadied him more than any voice could. The cockpit seat remembered weight. It shifted around him with the familiarity of a chair that had been sat in for decades and therefore had good manners. A thin fog gathered briefly on the inside of the glass, then cleared itself into a slow map. Planets and belts arranging across the pane like a map drawn by someone with affection for the small things. The ship did not announce its systems with blare or bells. Its voice was low and neighborly, the tone of someone with time for conversation. "Welcome aboard, Bob," Promenade said. He found himself answering before he knew he wanted to. "Good," he said, and the word was small and honest. When the hangar door eased open, the city unrolled away without fanfare. The metal slid, lights dimmed, and the ship lifted with the unhurried certainty of a thing that knows its own balance. The outer world narrowed to a strip of tarmac, then to nothing at all. The display rearranged itself, not as an instruction but as a map that assumed they would travel together. Mercury, the ship began. A tiny cratered coin shimmered into view, near the sun. Heat that bites, nights that take the warmth away, a dense heart that remembers fire. Bob pressed his forehead against the glass for a moment, feeling the faint cool of the cockpit, thinking of heat that could change what a surface meant. He listened to the way Promenade spoke of places, as if they were neighbors with patience and stories rather than problems to be solved. Venus, the next name came, and the globe coming into the view was clotted in clouds. A sister that guards its temper. Heavy air, pressure like a locked drum, secrets in its atmosphere, all extremes. Bob murmured. His fingers found a seam on the console, something to count the moment with. Earth, the blue planet rolled steady, water where it should be, noise and argument and stubborn patches of home, life that insists on its presence. The seat gave a sympathetic creak and the cockpit seemed to inhale. Bob saw, as if summoned, a morning cafe, the bite of bitter coffee, the small fights and reconciliations that stack into years. The ship catalogued not just facts but the weight of familiarity, what a place felt like when you'd been in it. Mars, came the red-brown globe, scored with channels and scars. Thinner air now, but memories of water. Volcanoes that remember rising. Canyons that keep old movements like a remembered gate. He traced one of those canyons on the glass with an idle finger, the old habit of tracing maps from childhood settling over him. Promenade's charting was intimate, facts braided with images that made the distance feel human. When the inner planets rested in their corner of the display, the ship's voice softened almost as if sharing a private joke. Mercury keeps its sun stories. Venus hides. Earth insists. Mars carries footprints like ghosts. Bob's shoulders unbunched. The ship was cataloging more than a ledger. It was naming acquaintances. Outside, the city dissolved into ordered dark. Inside, the cabin's hum felt companionable. Promenade rearranged for a longer route. "Set course outward," he said. "And outward we go," the ship answered, the tone a steady hand along a back. The hull shifted, stars slid into fresh view, and the map folded itself toward less-known regions. Promenade eased away from the inner lanes with practiced, unhurried motion. The giants filled the window with presence rather than mere data. Jupiter, it said, the display dominated by a banded colossus, a stormed monarch, the great red blotch older than many customs. Its moons, Io of fire, Europa with an ocean tucked under ice, Ganymede larger than some planets, Callisto grooved by time. Bob listened as the ship gave way to storms and moons like an old neighbor recounting the neighborhood's eccentricities. Gravity became character in Promenade's voice, a stern aunt, a rowdy cousin, a recluse with secrets. Saturn, it continued, and rings unfurled across the glass like lace. Delicate architecture of ice and rock. Titan keeps seas of strange chemistry. Enceladus sings in plumes. He watched the rings slide, thinking of skylights and old lace. the way fragile things could span distances and yet be made of ice. The outer planets came in cooler shades. Uranus tilted on its side like a sleeping giant. Neptune a quick blue with storms that ran faster than names. Uranus tilts and keeps long days, said Promenade. Neptune runs winds we respect. Triton walks backward and still makes geysers. Beyond them, the map softened into ragged points. Kuiper objects tucked at the edge of sight. Promenade's voice thinned and took on a private murmur. Pluto, it offered, small and complicated. Once a planet in lists. A world of shifting frosts. Charon close enough to be kin. The annotations felt like marginalia. Handwritten notes in the margins of a book. Mercury remembers. Venus guards its heat. Earth hums and argues. Mars remembers water. Each note turned empty space into story. He thought about the sun without planning to. The question rose as naturally as breath. And the star, what is it to you? The center, Promenade said simply. A steady furnace. It coughs sometimes. Flares and storms that give us auroras. It keeps our dance and seldom forgives carelessness. His head went back against the seat. The cabin's low machinery and the ship's unassuming voice offered permission to be plain. To occupy a space that asked nothing more of him than presence. Here, nobody at a desk checked his papers or weighed his apologies. Here, the ship wanted only to be a vessel and a companion. Stars reassembled as they threaded the outer skirts. The display showing fewer named anchors and more darkness stitched with small points. Suggestions of things beyond easy sight. Promenade's narration softened into stories more than lectures, as if offering a bookshelf and letting him choose a volume. Bob closed his eyes and let the rhythm of travel do its steady work. The hull kept the warmth of his touch. The voice catalogued planets and moons with a tenderness that turned distance into a series of small revelations. Whatever awaited, ice-buried oceans, nameless rocks, long empty orbital paths, would come not as a flash but as a sequence. One modest disclosure after another, stitched into the quiet. He did not pretend he wasn't carrying questions meant for a different silence. But inside the cabin the questions could wait. There was a comfort in being carried, in letting someone else keep the map while he learned to ask what he meant. Promenade did not demand answers. It offered steady narration, a map that would not scold for taking the long way. Outside, the dark widened, and the lights of familiar lanes thinned to single points. The ship's voice kept a cadence like a neighbor at the fence, knowing enough to be interesting, close enough to be trusted, distant enough to leave room to breathe. Bob sipped at the moment as if it were a warm, clear thing. The hangar had been a place that asked nothing. The ship asked little more. It spoke of moons and storms and frozen plains, but it also spoke in the soft language of proximity. This is close. This is far. This remembers fire. This keeps a secret. That kind of speaking was permission. To travel without scripts. To let the outward road teach him about the inward one. He rolled his knuckles once on the console. A small habit that felt like a farewell to something and an opening toward something else. Promenade adjusted its course in a quiet, confident way, folding space without ceremony. You can rest, the ship said. We will keep the map. He let himself, then, not resolve anything, not weigh his past or calibrate his future. He watched the dark and the slow drift of distant lights, and the ship kept on speaking in that kindly, factual tone that made the universe feel less like a ledger and more like a neighborhood with room for newcomers. For the first time in a long time, it was enough to be moving.